without further ado, I would just like to say thank you so much to Bright. One more round of applause. Welcome to the chapter meeting. Oh, crap. All right, let's see if I know how to work this. Here we go. So let's, where's Gadi? There we go. Okay.
Tallest guy in the room.
All right, tallest guy in the room. He's taller than me, which is, this is the CEO at Bright Security. Gadi's highly effective executive leader with 20 plus years of experience holding product marketing, customer success, and sales positions. Experience selling and partnering with enterprise globally, founded successfully and grew multiple companies in various industries. So starting his career more than 25 years ago, wow, you're pretty young for 25 years, but okay, and 82 unit at IDF and continued various roles across cybersecurity and other industries for the past 25 years. So graduated from Tel Aviv University with a BA and NYU, good, Stern School of Business with an MBA and Magna Cum Laude. Congratulations, sir. But the coolest thing is the presentation is just going to be focused on a 30-minute sprint. He wants to keep your attention and he wants to have time with you afterwards. So without further ado, come join us, sir. A round of applause.
Quick laptop switch.
Yeah, and you're gonna have to wear two mics.
Double mic.
This one.
Wow.
Yeah, you put that in your pocket. And I'll take that, and then you get hooked up, and you have the other lavalier.
Yeah,
to you as
right
well.
here.
My man. All right.
Hopefully they can. Can you guys hear me? Is this actually working? All right.
Yeah.
Let's just plug in and get started. Fortunately, that's what I need when I plug in.
And you know what's also wonderful is we have a dedicated AV person, and you just tell him, thank you, that we have somebody that's dedicated. He's right behind you because it has been a challenge.
Everybody turn and wave at Sean.
Wave at Sean, Daddy.
Okay.
Hi.
All right.
All right. So I was actually going to just present for 20 minutes.
Lavalier needs to be turned on.
Oh.
At least my lavalier.
Oh. Which of the two is that? Is that the recording one or the stage one?
For sure.
The recording one's on. That one is on, so this one needs to be turned on. Is that working? Okay. Good. So yeah, I was planning to present for 20 minutes, but Rob insisted that I go for an hour and a half, so you're in for a treat. But before I get started, I want to go back to this whole thing about bourbon tasting. Where was that when I was told to fly out here? So while I'd love to come back out for the bourbon tasting, I will throw out one thing. I actually live in the Bay Area, just north of San Francisco. Those of you who are coming out to OWASP Global, is anybody coming out to OWASP Global in November? Yes, perfect. Hit me up. We are going to do wine tasting. Okay, so it's not bourbon, I know, but it is wine tasting. Sonoma, Napa, we have quite good wine, so definitely let's talk about that, and maybe we'll do something reciprocal with this whole bourbon and wine and go from there. So today, we are going to talk about the benefits of shifting API and application security left. And I've been running Bright for the last 4 years since we started the company. The first year we were doing all sorts of fun stuff that had nothing to do with this because we didn't really know what we wanted to do. But after a year, we realized that there is a huge need for organizations to deploy a dynamic application security testing solution that will work in their DevOps environment. And we'll talk about that. But the one key thing that I never heard and I never got to dive into deep with AppSec people, with CFOs, with people in those organizations is what is the tangible value that you can actually measure from doing this? So before I get started, just a quick show of hands. Are there any AppSec people here? Anybody who's in charge of securing applications, securing APIs, make sure that that layer is not hackable, etc. Excellent, good. And of those people, well, what do the other people do? What are you guys focused on? Is it network security? Is it other types of cyber? So of the people who are focused at that application and API layer, Are you feeling that you can't keep up? Right? Because, yes, excellent, I'm seeing some nods. Right? That's a very common theme that we're seeing, and we'll talk about that throughout the presentation. I do want this to be interactive. Feel free to throw out questions, okay, because I don't want to just be talking at you. Feel free to ask questions, be interactive. If I don't hear your question, throw something at me. Okay, let's just make sure that we're communicating. And as Rob said, we'll be here after. We have some goodies on the table outside. David's here with me, and we'd love to have more of an interaction. I love starting the presentation with, we're talking ROI, boom, here's the ROI. Okay, let's not beat around the bush and lead you there. Boom, we're going to start with the ROI immediately. And when we think about the ROI of shifting application security left, and then we'll talk about what are all the factors that go into this, but we look at a number of different factors. Most organizations that you talk to, and this is research by Gartner and other research institutions, say that they are knowingly, well, 86% of organizations are knowingly releasing vulnerable applications and APIs into the market. That means that they have run tests, they have identified these vulnerabilities. Just by the time they identified them, it was too late in the release cycle to remediate them, which means that we are actually releasing vulnerable applications and APIs. That's 86% of organizations that are knowingly doing that. What that tells me mathematically is that there are 14% of organizations that are doing it unknowingly. Because as we know, everybody's vulnerable, right? So that is a huge number, and that's a big problem for organizations. Hey, what is the impact? What's the value that we're seeing with the customers that we have deployed to, and we measure this information? We're seeing that less than 50% are at a spot where they're actually knowingly releasing vulnerable applications. If you start calculating what is the risk to our organization, what's the probability that we will get hacked, either on APIs or on applications, if you're able to reduce those known vulnerabilities so significantly, that is a huge impact on your organization. And we have some ROI models. If you'd like to interact with us, talk to us, we'll go through those ROI models with you. Well, what is the value of reducing your vulnerabilities from 86% to 50%? There's a very, very clear ROI behind that. The next factor is directly tied to that, and that is how long does it take you to remediate a vulnerability once it is in production? Okay, so there is, 86% of you know that you have vulnerabilities in production. Now, how long does it take you to remediate those medium, high, and critical vulnerabilities? Right, we're not talking about the low vulnerabilities. That's fine, we can live with those. But the real big and impactful ones. On average, it takes 280 days to remediate a vulnerability. Anybody know the math of how many months that is? Come on, I'm trying to get some interaction here. I'm not... Absolutely, way too many is the right answer. Okay, it's more than 9 months to remediate a high vulnerability that you have in your production environment that you know that exists in your production environment. Now, why is that? Because development has their own priorities. They look at you and they say, well, if you're going to have me fix this vulnerability, it's actually going to take 2 or 3 weeks to fix it because I have no idea where it is. It's from 60, 70, 80, 200 sprints ago. I haven't dealt with this code for so long, I don't even know what it is. I have to take weeks now to remediate it. Hey, I don't want to do that. I have other things that I need to deliver on. Hey, if you're able to reduce that number, and ties back to the first row, to less than 50%, then now you are able to almost reduce that number by 50%. So we're looking at less than 150 days. It's still not good. It's still actually really, really bad, but it's much better than 280 days. Again, the real ROI, the real tangible benefit for that can be calculated and shown to where, if you're talking to the CFO, that's saying, well, why do you need this? Here, there's the tangible value. There's the real hard cash value for our organization from doing something like this. Okay, the next one is critical of how many vulnerabilities or what percent of vulnerabilities are you actually finding early on during the development lifecycle. And why is it so important to find these vulnerabilities early on? Because of the next point. Hey, there is research by NIST that shows that if you find a vulnerability at the unit testing phase or at one of those early phases, it will take you a 60th of the time to remediate that vulnerability versus if it's in production, because of all the things I mentioned earlier. Okay, that's a number that's out there. To be clear, a 60th of the time means the comparison between 1 hour and a week and a half of work. Okay, that is the comparison, that the ratio of 1 to 60. And that's why when you come to developers a long time after a vulnerability is in production and you tell them, oh, I need you to remediate this, they'll look at you like you're crazy. You're telling me that in a 2-week sprint, I now need to waste 2 weeks on remediating a vulnerability? That means that everything that I had in my plan for the sprint, I won't be able to do. That just doesn't work. Okay, we have a conflict. We have a problem. So going back to the previous point around the fact that now you can identify more than 50% of the vulnerabilities, and we're striving to get to 80%. But as we deploy, as we learn, as we grow, we are already north of 50%. You can find those early, you can remediate them much, much faster, and you can reduce that time that it takes to fix issues. That's a ratio of 11x, less than 5% to about 55%. Very, very significant to the impact on the organization. Hey, the other thing that ties into is how happy are your people? Is there, for those who are in AppSec, is there antagonism between you and the developers in your organization? Yes, right?
They don't like us finding anything.
That's very rude of you. How dare you find vulnerabilities in my code? This, by the way, this is a completely small tangent which has been driving me nuts for years. As Rob said, I've been doing this, not exactly this, but I've been in the world of cyber for more than 25 years. And I was a developer way back when we were still writing in COBOL and all sorts of interesting things like that. But hey, there is this concept where, oh, it's a bug in the software, that's my responsibility as a developer. It's a vulnerability, that's your responsibility. No, a vulnerability is a bug, right? They're no different. You need to fix it. And that's why this whole notion of shifting left. Hey, and that's why it's also so important to deploy the right solutions to the organization, because now you can start generating collaboration between the two teams instead of having the antagonism between the two teams. And that is very important. If you don't have the right tools, if you don't have the right processes, you're just going to create friction. And all of you have seen people that have left because they were overworked, they were unhappy with the antagonism with other groups, and that is just not a healthy work environment. If you have the right solutions, you can get to that healthy work environment. I do like to emphasize the last point here. Right? If you are breached, the cost to deal with that breach doesn't go down. It doesn't matter what tools you deployed in our world, right, to remediate those vulnerabilities, etc. The cost is still there. But the probability of being breached has dropped very, very dramatically because you actually remediated the vulnerabilities. This almost $8 million in cost is hard cost. We're not talking about reputation cost. We're not talking about things like that. Those of you who have seen the companies, like obviously Uber very recently, but Desjardins last year and others, the impact to their reputation is in the billions. Right? So it's really hard to calculate that impact. And I don't like talking about, oh, it's going to cost you $1 billion. No. The hard ROI around the points that I have here is very clear to demonstrate, and it's very clear why you should actually shift left. Questions, comments, thoughts about this before I now go back and say, okay, well, how the hell do we actually get there? Yes?
Have you defined shift left yet? I don't remember if you did or not.
No, but I will in a second. Okay, perfect. Anybody know what shift left is? Okay, we have a few. Perfect. We'll have a discussion about it because I've heard all sorts of definitions. Now, I did want to highlight one other thing. Forrester recently released their latest security or vulnerability report, and in that report, they're saying, look, most of the attacks on organizations are still happening at the application and API layer. About 70% of attacks are still happening at the application and API layer. That means that this problem and solving this problem is a huge problem for everybody. And that's very, very important. So it's not something that we can ignore or not take care of because it is very, very big. Okay? Now we'll start talking about what this actually means and what does shifting left mean and all of that fun stuff. If we go back, right, go back 15, 20 years when things like DAST were invested, and Hans can tell us all about that because he's been doing it since then, all right, we can see that it used to be perfectly fine to run dynamic application security scans once every 3 months, right? That was not a problem in the organization. Now, just a bit of definitions because the questions came up. Right? There are really 3 different types of application and API security, or predominant types of application and API security tests that you can run. There's something called static analysis. Static integrates directly into the code and looks at your primary code. Okay? Tangent from that, there's software composition analysis. There's debate whether it falls under AppSec or doesn't fall under AppSec, but software composition analysis looks at third-party code that you're bringing into your organization, and are you using secured third-party code? Okay, so static analysis integrates directly into the code and looks at the code itself. Hey, there's dynamic analysis, which is the world that we fall under, and historically dynamic analysis was the predominant solution. It was the most common solution. It's fallen out of favor in the last few years, exactly because of the reasons that we'll talk about today. Of these solutions were intended for the AppSec team. They take a long time to run, and that just is less applicable in a world of DevOps or a world of very fast deployment. So we'll talk about that in a second. The third one is called interactive application security, which is trying to be a combination of DAST and SAST, and run SAST scans and validate them with DAST. There are debates how well those solutions work and how easy it is to deploy them. Some have done it successfully, others have failed miserably, but those are the 3 key areas. We're going to focus on dynamic because that's A, the world we live in, and B, it is recognized that dynamic is the place where you should focus because that looks at your compiled application, which means that is what the hackers are trying to exploit. And when you're looking at static analysis, you're looking at SCA, you're looking at IAST, that is not compiled code, which means those are not necessarily vulnerabilities that will appear in your production environment. Okay? So, if we go back to where the world was, right, it was perfectly fine to run annual pen testing because you were releasing once, twice, maybe 3 times a year, and that was okay. Right? You could keep up, there was no problem for the AppSec team to keep up, because if you ran a DAST scan that took 3 weeks and it took you a couple of months to remediate the issues, you really weren't far behind from being able to keep up with your releases and make sure that your applications are secure. That's what the old world was until about 5-6 years ago, depending on how progressive the companies are. What happened then, though, is agile development came to play, right? And agile development, or DevOps, depending on how you look at it, started appearing more and more. And there's a lot of research that explains why doing continuous releases and why doing 2-week sprints or 1-week sprints is very valuable. And we're seeing, we work with quite a few large financial institutions, cybersecurity companies. We have customers that are deploying hundreds of times a day. Right? That's the level that they're deploying at. And suddenly all of these tools that were geared towards the AppSec world and ran for a long time, etc., became shelfware. Right? They became irrelevant because they were just not able to keep up. Right? And we had this seismic shift from a world where before you did 6 or 12-month release cycles, critical security issues could wait 4 months because my next release is only in 4-6 months. It's not a problem if we don't fix it immediately. We can fix it before the release. Okay? We had continuous pen testing cycles with people actually doing these penetration testing. Okay? And they had plenty of time. They could sit there for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks and run these tests and run these scans before we released. That wasn't a problem. Okay? And security was in sync with the release cycles. That wasn't an issue. And suddenly we shifted all our development practices, right? Development decided, oh, we're going to do everything differently. By the way, we forgot to tell application security that that's what we're doing, or we're not going to keep them in the loop and make sure that they're with us. Okay? And with that, we saw that multiple builds a day. As I mentioned, we have customers that are literally doing hundreds of releases per day. Okay? Pen testing organizations and AppSec teams just can't keep up. There's just no way for you to be able to run all of these scans and find all the vulnerabilities that are out there at the speed of DevOps. Okay? And that results in hundreds of releases that go untested. And that's why you're in the situation of, I found a vulnerability that's a critical vulnerability 150 days after or 200 days after we're already in production, because I was never able to keep up with the testing cycles. So it's a very different world. And in order to do that, you need to shift dash left. And now we'll get into the definition of shift dash left. Right? The whole concept of shifting dash left, or shifting application security overall left, means that you are integrating into the development lifecycle and starting to scan as early as the design phase. Right? You're starting to find vulnerabilities as early as the design phase. And if we go back to this diagram on the right, you can see the DevOps cycle where you're integrating application security into each and every step of your development lifecycle. Okay? That changes the whole dynamic between the development team and the AppSec team, because now the AppSec team becomes what I like to call the bookends. On one hand, you define the governance, okay, and you say what needs to be scanned, how often does it need to be scanned, and we are here to help you throughout the process. And on the other hand, you're doing the validation, right? You can run validation scans, you can make sure that you're reporting correctly to the organization, etc. But 90% of the work in the middle can be done by developers, which is shocking. Instead of you having to do all the work and invest all the time and trying to run after them and secure them, no. Give them the tools to do the work by themselves. Make it easy for them to do that work. And now you're looking at, first of all, developer execution. But in order to enable that, you have to drive integration and integrate into every step of the development lifecycle. So you're doing iterative scans, and we'll talk about that in a second. And the second thing is you have to have automation, because now instead of running one scan every 3 weeks, we have customers that are running hundreds of scans a day. Okay, those scans take 30 seconds. They're very quick, but that has to be automated. That has to be driven as part of the development lifecycle. So when a developer is running their unit tests, they're also running security tests. What a novel idea. Security is part of the development lifecycle. When they're running the integration test, they're also running security tests. Shocking. And guess what? It happens without them having to do anything manually. It has to be automated. And that is very, very important. Okay? The other things that you have to have is, we call it no false positives. People argue with me about that all the time. I like saying no false positives because it at least causes people to talk to me. But if not, then go with low false positives, right? Because as a DAS tool, you're actually able to validate every vulnerability and show proof of vulnerability. That's the next point here. Hey, give them proof that, yes, this is the vulnerability. We were able to find a way to exploit it. We don't actually exploit it because we don't want to destroy anything. And we give you remediation guidelines. So we're talking to both the AppSec team and the developers in a language that they can both understand. Hey, let's dive in deeper into the diagram and understand what that actually looks like. Instead of just running a scan on the right-hand side there in purple, where we used to run it once every 3 weeks, now we're shifting left. Okay, that's where the shift left comes in. It's earlier in the development lifecycle, and we're running iterative scans. So we'll run 100 scans at the unit testing level, and each scan will take 30 seconds. We'll run 50 scans at the integration testing stage, and every scan will take 15 minutes. We'll still run scans later in the development lifecycle. That's not a problem. But we've already found 60-70% of the vulnerabilities early on. How does that actually look? And this is a real example of what one of our customers is doing. I'm not allowed to name them, but it's a top 10 bank that you will all recognize. Hey, what they do is they broke out the scans into 4 stages in their environment. Stage number 1 integrated directly into their unit testing frameworks. Hey, and at that point, they can start testing for things like XSSs, OXIs, LFIs, all sorts of vulnerabilities that will actually manifest at that stage. Again, they're running hundreds of scans that are each taking around 30 seconds per day, and already finding all those vulnerabilities that can manifest, and developers are remediating them right on the spot as they develop. The next stage is in the CI, or the integration testing stage. Now we have a bigger footprint. Right? We're able to start seeing integration into SQLs and SSRFs and other vulnerabilities that would never manifest in the earlier stage. Okay? These would manifest here. These scans are on bigger chunks of compiled code. Hey, again, remember, this is true for both APIs and for applications. Very, very important. So there are bigger chunks of code. These scans will actually take about 15 minutes, right? So a bit longer. But again, it's still part of the development lifecycle. And at this point, that's where we hit about the 50% mark. Right? About 50% of the vulnerabilities can be found at this point, but they can be remediated very, very quickly. Then they still have pre-production scans that look for other things that you couldn't have found earlier. And there's also validation scans. So their AppSec team still runs scans and still validates that nothing was missed. And that's where some of the vulnerabilities that were not found earlier are found due to configuration issues, due to coverage issues, due to all sorts of things where they didn't manifest, or in many cases in APIs, are APIs that we didn't even know existed in the development stage, and we found them in pre-production. And then you try to shift them left as well and start testing them earlier as well. Very, very important. Yes?
In this pipeline, where do you envision the integration testing being done? Is that CI/CD area? Or?
Yeah, the integration testing is in the CI. Okay. Yeah, because that's what. Yeah. There's actually 5 points. Integration testing is slightly different than CI. In their case, they merge the two. Yeah. Yeah. It really depends on your organization and what are you ready for? What are you able to do? Some organizations are already ready for the unit testing, but then they immediately go to pre-production because their integration testing is not mature enough. Others, and we have quite a few customers that have actually started with the CI/CD stage, they're able to do that. They'd love to get to the unit testing, but unit testing is not mature enough. So they're deploying to 1 or 2 development teams that are more mature and expanding and growing from there as they see the value and they can prove the value throughout the organization.
One more follow-up question, if I may. So, when people are developing, especially when the development teams are spread across the globe, how much value is there in the unit testing part of it, or doing the DAS scans during the unit testing versus the integration test is where you're going to find out all those things, because the code is not complete, the functionality is not complete, right? When you talk to the developers, unit testing is, I'm just developing a small brick, right? I'm not even building a wall here, so what am I testing, right? And when the wall is built, that's when you can do some of the tests, like how strong it is and all of those stuff, right?
Yeah.
So where do you balance that? Do you see more organizations leaning more towards the integration testing and then go to the unit testing, or would you recommend starting at the unit testing and go to the integration testing?
Yeah, so if I go back 3 years, very few organizations were at the unit testing level. Most organizations were at the integration testing layer, etc. We are seeing more and more organizations shifting further left, and the larger financial institutions, the cyber security companies, the people that have a more mature development program, not even AppSec program, are absolutely doing everything in the unit testing and testing as much as they can in unit testing. Again, not everything will manifest there, right? You won't be able to test for SQL injections there, just doesn't exist. Hey, but if you can remediate 25% of the vulnerabilities that do appear there, then you are already 25% ahead of the plan that you were in. And remediating issues here at that spot takes seconds. It's nothing. Right? It's really quick because you're looking at one entry point, at one parameter. You can immediately see where the vulnerability is, and the developer can fix it in seconds. If you're moving right, now you're looking at minutes or hours, and it expands into days and weeks beyond that.
Thank you.
Sure. No, thank you. You're the one who's interacting. Come on, people, interact. Does everybody need to get up? I know it's late. Does everybody need to get up? Like stretch a bit? That's fine. I'm not far from the end. A very important thing that we always get into this discussion when we're doing proofs of concept and we're deploying is don't try to turn on the entire hose when you're running a scan. So people are saying, yes, I want to run this in the unit testing, or I want to run it in the CI, but I want to run on my entire application with all 7,000 payloads that you have, and I want it done in 15 minutes. Like, there's a math problem here, okay? You are running 2,000 parameters, right? 100 entry points, 7,000 vulnerabilities on each, and you want to do it at 10 attacks per second, and you want it all done in 15 minutes. Right? That just doesn't work mathematically. So you need to be intelligent on how you set this up so you don't end up having a lot of developers hate you because now you're delaying all of their development life cycles, and this just doesn't work. Okay? We talked about the role of AppSec mainly. The one thing I didn't touch on is the bottom part here, and that is the reporting part. If you're not running after developers all the time and trying to figure out how you can do more scans and more scans and more scans, but putting it in their hands, you can take a step back and you can report to the organization and understand, where do we actually have vulnerabilities? Which teams are performing well? Which teams are not performing well? Do we have overall problems in the organization? You can actually take a deep breath and come back with recommendations and analysis instead of constantly running after trying to keep up with the development lifecycle. And that is a very important piece. Yes?
In your experience, how many organizations actually fail a build? I still see that as an anomaly. A lot of organizations don't fail builds, right? They leave it up to the security team to figure it out.
Yeah, so we are seeing more and more organizations, again, large financial institutions, cybersecurity company, that are failing builds that are on critical and high. Not on medium or low, but on critical or high vulnerabilities, they're failing builds now. Yeah, definitely. And by the way, it's much easier to fail a build at the unit testing stage because the developer looks at it and can solve the issue within 20 seconds. All right, so they're less concerned about actually having a build failed at that point. As you move forward, failing a build becomes more onerous. And that's why you want to also find, thank you, I'll add an ROI point.
You just fail forward into the next sprint. Okay.
Yeah, just fail into production. Fail into your next job, unfortunately. All right, perfect. This is just the chart that I talked about by NIST. I like sharing the information that shows exactly the growth and how much more onerous it is to actually solve a vulnerability as it gets later in the development life cycle. And I like to leave people, because I'm right at the 30-minute mark, with remember this chart. It all comes back to this. When somebody asks you in the organization, well, why should I do this? Right, there's real tangible ROI behind doing this. And it's going to have a very positive impact on risk reduction in your organization, on your ability to deliver faster and deliver more, on the happiness of your team. There's real tangible ROI behind all of these factors. So with that, I'll wrap up. Again, Dave is here with me. I'm here. These are our emails. Please talk to us. We're hanging out. Yeah, it's just me wrapping up. You can talk. All right. And yeah, if you are coming out to San Francisco, please hit me up.
So, real quick, guys, if you want to try the free version, it's on our website. We are a subscription-based service, but that it is free, just for it's an individual version of it. There is obviously an enterprise version, which is a subscription-based model. We're hosted in AWS, whether it's the freeware version or the enterprise version. But if you want to try the free one out, that's well to do. If anybody wants to step up to the enterprise, just let us know.
Yeah. And
Question?
Yeah.
Do you interact with a web application firewall or partner with a web application firewall vendor?
we've talked to a number of WAF providers in terms of two ways. One is on the API front and on the API discovery and being able to identify what APIs the organization doesn't even know about so we can scan them. The other one is on feeding them information about vulnerabilities that were identified. So there are a number of WAF providers that we've talked to. Some are stronger partnerships, some are weaker partnerships.
There's another question?
Yeah, so in the market, what differentiates your DAS solution from another? I think the answer is that you're doing, some of the unit testing that other solutions might not. But then can you talk about code coverage? Like what sort of frameworks do you support?
Yeah, so two things. Thanks for the question. One is we are definitely the only solution that really shifts left and put the solution in the hands of developers. And the first question we ask any customer is, are you going to put this in the hands of developers? If you're not, there are better solutions if you're just trying to run a Dask and deploy it to your AppSec team. They might be a better fit. Depending on what you're trying to do, let's have the discussion. So that's definitely one critical point. There are a few other points around the ability to test for business logic vulnerabilities and some things that go to our origin where we have a unique differentiator. So there are tests that we can test for that actually others can't test for. But definitely the big differentiator is that ability to shift left and run these scans much, much earlier.
So how do you allow the developers to have control over when they scan their apps while keeping separation of duties? Because, as a security professional, you don't want them in there messing with your stuff. But at the same point, is there like an API connector or, how do you manage that?
Yeah, so I'm happy to give you a quick answer. The bigger answer is let's schedule a demo and you can actually see it. That will be much more effective. But the quick answer is we enable you to build templates that tie directly into the unit testing frameworks, the integration testing frameworks, etc. So those templates are called around what should we scan for, how broad should the scan be, etc., etc. So the AppSec team still has control, but they don't have to be manually involved. Okay? That reminds me around the frameworks that you asked. So very different than what static analysis solutions need to do. We don't actually have to add support for a specific coding language or anything like that. We just need to integrate with a unit testing framework. That's a 2 to 3 day integration for a framework. And we support all the major ones. So all the Java, JavaScript, .NET, C#, and a bunch of environments like that are all supported.
How are the developers notified?
This is the last question.
Yeah, how are the developers notified that something's wrong?
So in 3 different ways. One, right within the IDE, they can get the information just like they get it for unit testing. Okay? 2, this can come as part of reporting in our application. And 3, all the reports are shared, or all the data can be shared into whatever SIEM, or if you're using a solution like Cider or something like that, it can be integrated with those.
All right, let's have a big round of applause.
All right, thank you, everybody.